Hello, AP Statistics students. This is video 7, which is about factors, levels, and treatments, the basics of experimental design. So this lesson is going to just introduce you to some of the vocabulary that you'll need when we are talking about experiments. Hopefully, at this point, you know that correlation does not equal causation. In other words, just because two variables show a strong association or a strong relationship does not mean that one causes the other. We talked about that in Chapter 3 when we learned about lurking variables, and we're talking about it again now. Now we are going to learn how do we provide good evidence for causation. How do I conclude that one thing causes another? And the way that we do that is with a well-designed experiment. That's the only way that I can prove a cause and effect relationship is with an experiment. So in the first half of this chapter, we discuss methods for properly choosing a sample that would be used to represent a population in a polar survey. So we learned about simple random samples, stratified random samples, cluster samples, as well as some less valid sampling techniques like voluntary response samples and convenience samples. And those were all ways of choosing participants for our survey. Now we're moving on to experiments. And when we talk about experiments, usually our sample is already chosen. Unfortunately, it's usually a voluntary response sample. We have volunteers for our experiments. And while we know that that's not the best way to select a sample, it's usually necessary because sometimes we're talking about medical experiments and it's not really ethical to select someone and force them to participate in your experiment. So a study is classified as an experiment when we are imposing a treatment. So if you're asked if something is an experiment, you have to ask yourself, are we imposing a treatment? Are we telling our volunteers what they have to do? If we're observing what happens anyway, we know that that's an observational study. So a study is an experiment when we impose a treatment in order to observe a particular response. Here's some sort of building block vocabulary for when it comes to talking about experiments. So first we need to talk about experimental units. These are the individuals on which the experiment is done. These are my participants. Now the experimental units are the smallest units that we can apply a treatment to. If our experimental units are people, we typically call them subjects. It sounds a little bit more humane than experimental units. So subjects are experimental units when they are humans. And then the treatment is the specific experimental condition that's applied to the experimental units. Obviously, in experiments, it's important to distinguish between the explanatory variables and the response variables. And when we're talking about experiments, we often call the explanatory variables factors. So factor is just another term for the variable that I'm testing. And it's possible to test multiple factors. In fact, a lot of times we are going to test multiple factors. We want to know what are the joint effects of two different variables. In these experiments, the treatments are formed by combining specific values of each of the factors. These specific values are referred to as levels. So, the factors are the different variables I'm testing. The levels are the different values of each of these variables. And the treatments are the different combinations of these levels of the factors. That sounds like a lot of vocabulary, so we're going to do an example that I think will make this easier. Suppose I'm interested in testing the effect of vitamin E on blood pressure. I'm also interested in the role that exercise plays in the relationship. So we can see here that I'm testing joint effects. I want to know about vitamin E, but I also want to know about exercise. So each of my volunteers takes a certain dose of vitamin E, either none, 200 milligrams, or 400 milligrams. Also, they either engage in no exercise or light exercise. And I want to know what are the factors, what are the levels, and what are the treatments. I want you to pause the video right now, maybe go back and look at that vocabulary again, and see if you can identify the factors, the levels, and the treatments. Okay, I'm going to give you a hint that'll help you check your answers. There are 2 factors. For one of those factors, there are 3 levels, and for the other factor, there are 2 levels. There are a total of 6 treatments. Pause the video again and check your answers and see if they fit with the numbers that I gave you here. The 2 factors are the amount of vitamin E and the amount of exercise. Those are the 2 variables that I'm trying to measure, our vitamin E consumption and participation in exercise. For the vitamin E factor, there are 3 levels: none, 200 milligrams, and 400 milligrams. For the exercise factor, there are 2 levels: no exercise and light exercise. The 6 treatments are all of the possible combinations of vitamin E and exercise. So they are no vitamin E, no exercise, 200 milligrams of vitamin E, no exercise, 400 milligrams of vitamin E, no exercise, and then 0 milligrams of vitamin E, light exercise, 200 milligrams of vitamin E, light exercise, and 400 milligrams of vitamin E, or apparently 4,000. 400 milligrams of vitamin E, light exercise. Thanks for staying with me there. Okay, so I have 6 treatments, 2 factors. One of the factors has 3 levels and the other has 2 levels. We need to be very confident with this vocabulary. They like this a lot on the AP exam. So go back and watch this again, make sure that makes sense, and please answer the questions that follow this video. Thank you.